Hi, everybody. I'm Joe. I came from Marion, Indiana, which is about 60 miles from here, and moved up to Fort Wayne in the 1980s to work at a television station and got married up here, and I've stayed ever since. And I just want to say I've loved family history, and I come from a big family, big Catholic family. So there's lots of storytelling in our family. And so I've heard these stories for years from various family members. I was lucky enough that my grandparents on my mom's side met and married in Fort Wayne and then traveled around. So we'll talk a little about that. Also, at the end of the discussion, as we talk about collecting stories, which is what I want to do overall, we're talking about collecting stories. I just want to let you know that I'll talk about three ways to do it. Whether it's in person or on an electronic device like a camera or on a phone. And how to do those. We'll go into some of the details on how to do that, what kind of questions to ask, because a lot of us are not natural interviewers. I was a shy kid and just learned through jobs and other things how to start asking questions. So that's kind of what we're going to talk about today. That's me. This was a few years ago interviewing my aunt and uncle. I had gone to Texas to do some of their life story. And I brought my camera. You can see there's actually two cameras and a couple lights. This is going to a bigger extreme, and I'm not expecting most people to do this kind of deal. But I just wanted to show you that this is the kind of things I've done with a number of people, both for genealogy and I worked at a church for a number of years collecting stories. So that's kind of been my life ever since I was a kid and dad had a film camera. I've been tinkering around with it my whole life. So it's kind of funny. I worked in television and church, and in church we told 6 or 7 minute stories every week of someone from the church. I'd interview them and they'd tell me about their life, maybe something difficult they've overcome, and they'd call those journeys. And with the journeys, the congregation could hear a new story every week about somebody that had been through cancer or a divorce, or it was a faith story, of course. And they were super instructive to anybody watching because you're like, oh my gosh, they're willing to share their story with me, and maybe I learned something about myself. I remember when I was younger and in my 20s, and I happened to have an illness called to be vulnerable. I had an illness called obsessive compulsive disorder. And it made me, if you've ever heard of OCD, it makes you act in a certain way and be kind of nervous. When I saw some stories on television from old talk shows like Donahue and Oprah, where they were discussing OCD, finally they started talking about it in the early 80s. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I've got a name for what I'm going through, and other people are going through it. It knocked me flat and it changed my life because suddenly I wasn't alone. And so that's part of the power of telling stories. And all of you, as the information and story collectors for your families, I find that absolutely lovely because what you're doing, as you well know, is you're collecting current and past stories so that not only for yourself and your current family, in the future, there's this thread going through your whole lives, and everybody can say, I came from there, at least as far as we know. I came from there. And I know my great grandfather had this kind of experience, and maybe that impacted his family as he was raising a family. And it just goes on and on and on. So you're giving your family a gift, as you well know. What I'm going to do now is share a little about my family and my grandma and grandpa's story. I'm just going to tell you a brief story about my grandma and grandpa. My great grandfather, Francis Xavier Burr, came from Alsace Lorraine, like a lot of people. And in 1881, he boarded an ocean liner, in this case, the Pereire. It's a 300 passenger ship. And he cast his fortune in America. And I asked, why did he leave? I don't know. Maybe it was financial. After all, we were America and a land of great promise. Maybe it was anti-Catholic sentiment that was brewing in Germany at that time. But one way or other, he ended up in New York City, came by himself, moved to Huntington, Indiana, and he worked for the railroad industry there. They had a big railroad, and this is interurban, I believe, but they had a big railroad that was built over actually the Wabash Erie Canal, a lot of it. because the canal was one of the first railroads in Indiana and many parts of the country where they could mass move big things and people before they had good roads and they had railroads. So anyway, he moved to Huntington with it there and married, had kids. My grandfather was the third born of their boys. He married a woman named Margaret, and they had three kids. And my grandfather, his mother died when he was very young. And the story is told that when they were young, the brothers would look out the window, and I'll get you a picture of my grandfather and remember their mother and just be longing for their mother. And they had, by that time, had moved, and they would so long for home. Anyway, Grandpa was on the left there was a artist, and he moved to Fort Wayne as a sign painter, a church decorator, and he also painted portraits. He decorated churches, and like in a church in Huntington, Indiana, he decorated the ceiling with spiritual pictures in 1917 that are still amazingly there. He met Anna O'Brien, who's on the right here. She had been actually a childhood sweetheart in Huntington. Her father had moved to Fort Wayne to work as the transportation director of Fort Wayne. Herman moved to Fort Wayne. They re-met, married. In 1910, Anna had a child, and the child unfortunately died at birth. And the pregnancy had left Anna very weak. And sadly enough, in 1915, she died. And that left my grandfather. By the way, I want to that's the sad part, but I want to go back and show you how newspapers used to advertise weddings. And this is from the, I believe, Huntington newspaper when Anna and Herman got married. You can see on the left here, there, just on the right is the wedding announcement. On the left is a great story about mutilated bodies found. So those are the kind of things you found in the paper every day before all the big media was around. Anna died, and here's a bit of her news clipping. She died at her sister's home, right in an area of town. When I looked up where the home was where she died, it was in the neighborhood where Chief Little Turtle was buried, and so that used to be Kikianga. And so amazingly, she had died at a house that was part of that. So when my grandfather was lost in deciding what to do, a psychiatrist told him, "Hey," probably not a psychiatrist, but a counselor or his doctor said, "Hey, here's an idea. Why don't you join the army?" This was World War I, and they were fighting over in Europe. And so grandfather went down to Kentucky to get training at a camp in Kentucky. And here's where the story gets kind of interesting. As the ship, after he got training, as the ship was being shipped out and as people were leaving, somebody amazingly said, as the story goes, I'll say, does anybody on in the crew here, anybody in our company know how to paint signs? Because we need somebody to stay behind. And grandfather raised his hand and stayed behind in Kentucky. And the story goes that the ship was torpedoed or hit a mine at sea from a German boat and sank, and everybody on board died. Whether it's true or not, I don't know, but grandfather came back. He met my grandmother, Oliva Stein, another German, and she came from a big German family that had moved to Fort Wayne. My great grandfather Stein worked at a Catholic church where he was a choir master, and so grandma and grandpa dated and got to know each other really well. Went on some road trips, and they didn't own a car, but I'm sure they were with friends at that point, and ended up getting married. Now, this was during, I'm just telling you these things because in 1917, 18, when they met and got married, and he had walked into a Catholic church, heard a woman singing, and thought it sounded like an angel. He went out and found out who the woman was. It turned out to be my grandmother, and that's where their relationship started. The war ended, by the way, World War I ended, and he was able to come back very quickly to his family, to his wife, and they started a family here in town. And so why I'm telling you some of this stuff is because I showed you some pictures. And what I'm going to do now is, as a video maker, I'm going to show you how I approached it, telling the story on video. Now, I come from a television background, as I say, and so it's second nature to me to create videos and little documentaries. I'm not suggesting anybody out there do that. But what I do want to show you is kind of one way that I chose to tell the story of their early childhood or their early, how they met and some of the story. So a few years ago, I asked my cousin Joe, I wrote a script and I asked my cousin Joe to narrate it. And so this is a little clip from the Burstein documentary.
Hi, I'm Joe Bir. Well, for our Huntington relatives, that would be Joe Bir. I'm in Fort Wayne, Indiana. I've lived here since 1974. Most of us Burstein family members are well aware of our history that centers around Huntington, Indiana, Battle Creek, Michigan, Ohio, and Marion, Indiana, where our grandparents raised the family. Grandpa Herman grew up in Huntington, about 30 miles from here, where his father worked for the Erie Railroad. Grandma Leaf Stein Burr grew up in Ohio, where her father was music director and headmaster of a women's school. But before Grandpa Burr ever met Grandma Burr, before they raised their big family in Marion, Grandpa had another life and another future, right here in Fort Wayne. And it began somewhere after the turn of the last century. This is historic Fort Wayne. Well, a reproduction of Fort Wayne, an American outpost in the western frontier. It's located right across the river from the ancient Indian village of Kikiyanga. This was the capital of the once thriving Miami Indian community at the confluence of three rivers. Early French traders had a very valuable fur trade here. The French eventually set up a military outpost here, perhaps as much interested in gaining new land as they were in converting the natives to Catholicism. The British, too, had an interest in this territory and eventually gained control, only to be driven out by various Indian tribes before General George Washington sent troops to take control of the area. As was the sad fate of tribes across the United States, the Miami tribe was defeated and the first Fort Wayne was built in 1794. All that to say, a little more than 100 years after Fort Wayne was built, after the completion of the Wabash-Erie Canal, and after the growth of the railroad, German and Irish immigrants moved into northern Indiana for the plentiful industrial and railroad jobs. One immigrant, Francis Xavier Burr, was raising a family in Huntington, Indiana, about 30 miles from here. Francis grew up in a large Catholic family in Alsace-Lorraine, a large territory in Europe, sharing borders with the present-day France and Germany. After troubles at home, 20-year-old Francis sailed abroad to New York at the age of 20 in 1881. The ship he sailed to America aboard, the Perrier, which at the time was a well-known ship, it's mentioned in the opening pages of Jules Verne's novel, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. And in 1871, Auguste Bartholdi had sailed the Perrier in a trip to convince America to let him build his greatest creation, the Statue of Liberty. Francis Xavier disembarked in New York and made his way to Pennsylvania, where he heard of work in Huntington, Indiana, as a blacksmith for the Erie Railroad. In 1882, married Margaret Rodgaven, and in fairly quick succession, they had three boys, Frank, Joseph, and Herman. In 1891, when Francis's wife Margaret died, Francis, Herman, and his brothers were devastated. We don't know the cause of death, or sadly, much about her. This Huntington newspaper clipping mentioned her death. A year later, Francis Xavier married another German immigrant, Teresa Tracy Hauser, who eventually birthed 6 children of her own. The story has been told that sometime after Francis and Teresa were married and were busy raising children of her own, the 3 Burr boys were sent off to live with relatives in the country. It's also said that there were times when they sadly looked out the window toward home. I'm sure the premature death of his mother had a profound effect on Herman and foreshadowed another tragedy that was to impact his life a quarter century later.
So what I wanted to say about that is there's different ways to tell a story to flesh it out. I've got a family tree. I've got books. My aunt came to Fort Wayne 40, 50 years ago to go to the genealogy department for Marion, and she did a bunch of research. I still got the 3-ring binder for that. So you guys are all doing this your own way, which any of it is phenomenal. I'm a big fan of any of those things. I had an Aunt Barbara. I still do. She's living right now, and she was a secret weapon and gift in our family because she told stories. She was trained as a journalist. When we were young, she would gather us all together at family gatherings and tell ghost stories and just both scare and delight us. And she started making phone calls to various families in the 1980s and 90s and said, "Hey, what's going on in the family? Tell me about what's happening." And she was writing these things down as she talked. And what was delightful about that, because a lot of us wouldn't send our own information to her, she could have asked, "Well, what's going on?" And most of us would say, stuff I don't, but never get around to sending her anything. But she ended up putting together a newsletter. And what's powerful about the newsletter is it was called Cuz, and every month or two or whenever she'd put them out, very, very humble kind of a publication. She would publish stories, and they would be history stories, they'd be current events. And my grandfather, her father-in-law, was the one that was the Herman Burr, that was the painter. He was also an inventor, so she dedicated one of them to some of the inventions that or the patents that grandfather had. And so she gave us a really an amazing gift because of what she did publishing these things. So you guys maybe already have those kind of things. Who knows? But I would say one of the things she did was creating us the need to tell stories. And I want to talk about one of the things my cousins did a little before that, even. I had two cousins when they were in high school, they were older than high school. They decided to go interview my Grandma Bir, who we saw earlier uh, in the video and the pictures. By this time in 1979, she was in her late 80s, and they went and asked her questions about her life. They just carried along an audio cassette recorder. But what she did with that was what they did was powerful because they sat down with her for an hour and just asked her questions. And the audio recording isn't great, but I'll play a little clip from that. And I want to tell you why I want to play a clip from that, because when I popped that into a cassette player years later, I heard my grandmother's voice for the first time in years. And if your grandmother or grandparent, any of them were like mine, a very beloved person in your life, somebody that just meant so much to me. And so when they were interviewing her, because I lived sort of nearby, my brother or I would stop in as my mom would once in a while and say, "Hey, you need anything at the store? Or can I mow your lawn or something?" And the day that my cousins were interviewing her, I happened to stop by, and I don't remember at all that they were doing this. But when I listened to the video, the audio, and heard her talking to my cousins, and then I heard me come in the door, and I heard her say, "Well, hi, Joe." That about broke my heart. So I'll play you a little clip of that.
Hi, Joe.
Hi.
Are you getting some rest? I hear you had to work yesterday.
Yeah.
I hope you got some rest.
Well, at our house it's pretty hard when everybody's home.
Huh?
It's pretty hard when everybody's home. They all yell so loud in the morning. Come on, everybody.
Yeah. Hey, do you have to work tonight?
No, I got to do it off. Don't you?
Thank goodness.
Party. Yeah.
It's the most ordinary conversation in the world. But for me, it's like, oh my gosh, to hear my grandmother say in my voice, plus to list all these things that were happening in her life. We've since transcribed. I've used those in some videos I've done. Very powerful stuff, because if my cousins wouldn't have asked her, and I actually, my aunt also sat down with her once, if they hadn't asked her, we wouldn't have it, because most of us don't ask our relatives or our friends their family story and get it down on paper. I mean, we do. Maybe a lot of you do. So I don't want to shortchange anybody. But I've talked to more people in my life as somebody that collects stories, and they say, boy, I wish I had so many questions now that I would ask mom or dad or grandma or grandpa about their stories from the service or their stories how they met or where they worked. And those are the kind of things that give us a sense of belonging, and they flesh out our histories and who we are as a family and a people and what culture we're in ways that are irreplaceable. And so I asked myself, how can I start to do that with my family, like my Aunt Barbara does, on video, because that was natural for me. So that's what I started working on. So in our time remaining here, I'm going to go over three things that we're going to talk about. One is how to conduct an interview with somebody and what questions you might ask. Number two is how to record an interview on your smartphone or your video camera and end up with a text transcription that you can actually use in a book or you can paste somewhere. And three is if you're interested in creating your own stories on video or audio, I'll give you some brief tips on that. I couldn't possibly go into all the details here, but I'll also have a sheet at the end with some links to some resources, whether it's a YouTube video or it's a website that talks about different resources you can use. And I'll also include some of the questions I ask people in this handout, because a lot of us don't know what to ask. But like any story, it's going to have a beginning, a middle, an end, and the best stories are going to draw us in. And we want to know, what's the risk? Why is it important? And how did you feel? We want to know not only the facts, but we want to know internally or spiritually, how did it affect you? How did it change you? So I say, whatever you're doing, whether it's writing down a story or interviewing a person, whatever you can do, that's great. Do that. If you're recording audio or video, I just want to say, find a quiet room. I know the library in Fort Wayne has a quiet room that they set aside just for family interviews. When I took a tour there, Allison showed me that there's this beautiful room. You can go in there, bring your equipment, and just interview somebody in the privacy and the quiet of the library. But I'd say one way or other, don't sweat it, try it, and just get your feet wet. So I first started in the clip I accidentally showed earlier was from in 1985 when I was just out of college. I rented a cheap old video camera from a VHS rental store, and I interviewed my uncle, and my aunt, and my mom. And I'll just show you the roughness of that. And it's from 1985. But you guys lived on the church grounds, so did you pay rent for that, or was that?
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
Well, no, Mom
both.
did for a long time.
Well, for a long time, that was to
But
pay
when-
for the church stuff.
I know it,
too.
and I can remember though when she started paying Father $20 a month, that
Yeah.
she was very happy that she could pay him $20 a month. And in fact, that's what she was paying him, I think, at the end.
Did you guys have to go to church every day, or how would they instill faith in a family when they're
Well, it was
younger?
expected that we went to mass every day.
Yeah.
It wasn't we didn't even think of a have to. We just automatically.
Yeah,
it was part of our
that was part of-
Christian education.
yeah.
As I say, my family's, we all were raised Catholic, and grandma and grandpa, when they moved to Marion, part of the reason they moved there was to work at a Catholic church. Grandpa didn't make a lot of money as an artist, and they lived on the church grounds. Grandma became the school cook, and grandpa did all kinds of things around there. And so it was during Depression. They lived right by the railroads. Bums, hobos, as they called them, would come to the house for food, and grandma would always try to provide food for them because amazingly, in these rough times, she still felt like, obviously, which was so sweet, that generosity still rules the day. So here's some tips I would give you, roughly speaking, to help people feel comfortable. Because the first thing you want to do is make people, they're going to say, I don't want to be interviewed. I don't know anything. I don't know how to tell my story. I've heard that over and over, and I understand. But the thing is, we're just talking, we're having a conversation. And so I try to tell them, look, we're just going to sit down. I may have an audio recorder or a video camera, but we're just chatting. So you'll forget about that hopefully in a minute, and let's just talk. Because if I started out and say, all right, tell me your story, people are going to be overwhelmed and they're saying, I have no idea where to start. What am I supposed to do? So I always have some questions I start with. And I would say, like any good conversation, there's give and take. So you got to be patient with the interview and listen. Don't rush it, because sometimes they can come up with a gem after you let them just think about it a minute. And that's hard for me sometimes, because I want to go to the next question, but that's not fair to them, and it's not fair to how some of us think. So I would also say, when I meet somebody, I met a lot of people through my church interviews whom I didn't know, but that had a difficult something happened. The pastor would say, Joe, I need you to interview this person. This happened to them, or they went through this in their life. Can you get the story, and let's put together a story to show next Sunday? And I didn't know the people a lot of times, and so I had to make them feel comfortable with a stranger and all this equipment. So I'd say, hey, how are you? I know this is hard. A lot of people looked at me back then as like, oh my gosh, I've got to talk to somebody and they didn't sleep the night before. And I said, I hate that, because we're just going to chat. And so we'd chat, and I happened to be recording it. And I could ask them all kinds of questions. It was like a front row seat. But one of the things I did first, I shared some things about myself so that they'd feel like, okay, he's sharing some things, I can share some things. And the other thing I would do is say, look, I'm going to ask you questions. If there's ever a question I ask you that you're not comfortable answering, do not answer it. This is not about digging up dirt. This is not about embarrassing you or finding out things like that about your life. I want you to share what you're willing to share, what you think would be powerful to somebody else to hear, because people in the congregation would hear these things and be just like, oh my gosh. And it would open up conversations and vulnerability, and the fact that we're all human and we're all broken in some way. It would open that up wide open. And then the pastor would speak about something that may have to do with that interview. And it just created moments that made us all realize we're human. We all are broken in some way. And how can we help and walk with each other through the next step of our life? And I think that's what we're doing when all of us are creating genealogy, because there's hardship. As Kate and I were talking, people are survivors. All of us are survivors. To get to a certain point in your life with the things we may or may have gone through, both the good and the bad, we are not only survivors, but we've made it, and we have something that we can pass on. And so that's what I try to get from people, even if it's an informal conversation. One of the things I want to say is, because at church I used to do difficult conversations. You may not do that with family members. It may get into something that's deep. You may not even want to hit that, or somebody might not want to talk about it. That's perfectly fine. I had a friend who said, "Could you interview my mother?" She was from Mississippi or Louisiana, grew up in a community of mostly white people in town, and the African Americans, as often happened, worked on farms. They were the ancestors or the descendants of slaves. They had obviously freedom back when she was a kid in the 1930s and 40s. But the question of how well did everybody mix together? And she said, we really got along with everybody very well. But she did still share a moment where she and her family would go to a nearby town to watch a movie, like any kid wanted to do. And she just had a little snippet about that. So I'll play you a little snippet about that.
We will walk up about that mile to get to this movie. Up in the little town movie theater, went past the fence. Okay. In front of built in front of the movie was a nice restaurant with all the nice tablecloths. They used to wear it on the little plastic tablecloths on there. And they had the red plastic and blue plastic, little blocks things. And they had that on there and everything. That part of it was the bus station. And you could wait outside. Black folks could, because they could not go in and sit into the restaurant. You were not allowed to go in there. So if you had somebody coming on the bus or something, you had to stand outside and wait on that railway bus and watch them get off and then go on. If you wanted to get out of the sun or whatever from in front, in the very back, down through in the back, there's a storage room with a couple of chairs. You could go and sit in that storage room and wait for your bus, but you could not sit in the restaurant. And as far as the movie theater was concerned, there was stairs, steep stairs that went way up, and they had like the little room. That's where you get you the 25-cent ticket. And there was the balcony. You went in, blacks and coloreds only went in that section and sat down to watch the movies. And downstairs, big, nice downstairs where they had all the nice seating and all of this and food being passed, that was for the whites only. And they put the sign, white only. And for the going up the stairs, they say colored.
A lot of us, depending on who you are, I know, for instance, and I'll say this, my dad, family coming from Ireland, I know, for instance, 100 more years ago, Irish were looked down upon, as were a lot of people from countries that came over to what was mostly European, beyond the native tribes that we sequestered to reservations. So many of the people came over were European, and so there was a lot of prejudice. And when Molly was telling her story and sharing a little of that, that is something that I have not experienced. But she shares that, and her family knows about it, and they've had their own experiences. It builds a history. It's not that you should dwell on the past, but it gives them a good idea. This is where we came from. This is where we made it, and things like that. So when I'm interviewing people, I like to start from the beginning and ask about their childhood. Was it happy? Was it sad? Were we rich or poor? What did your dad do, or what did your mom do? And I build from there. What were some of the significant events in your life? How did somebody meet their spouse, or when they met their spouse, was it love at first sight? I can hear some funny stories about that. Uh, and I ask, what are some of the biggest changes in your life that really changed you? And it's not like I have to get big, impressive answers, but sometimes things happen. If your mother or father dies when you're young, big impact on your life. Other things like that can have big impacts, and that kind of changes who you are. So again, I listen, so that I listen closely as best I can so that I can ask follow-up questions. Because to me, that's most important, to say, A, I'm looking at you in the eye and I'm listening. And B, when I ask a follow-up question, they know that I'm paying attention and not just going through my checklist of questions, like, okay, 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 okay. And I think that's really important for people to feel honored as you're asking them these very personal questions. And so some people are natural storytellers and some people are not. So you just have to get the vibe of how they're coming and go with that. And if I'm talking to somebody new, I'd like to know a little something about them before I start, so that I'm not just saying, okay, I have no idea what I'm talking to you about. I like to start out with that. Now, and it may take more than one sitting down if the people are patient, or if you have a big enough story. Don't try to make any interview a marathon, because you want it to be fun, and you want it to be conversational, and you want to have good memories of this. And often people tell me, Joe, I'm not saying I have special skill, but they say, Joe, I was worried about this and it turned out really good, and it was actually fun to do, or it was therapeutic, or whatever. That doesn't always happen. But if that can happen, then they've had a good experience, while also laying down a whole bunch of information that's going to affect generations to come. Another funny thing is, I had a family reunion in Huntington a few years ago, and we had our big Catholic family there. And to save time, I said, hey, each family, the kids, my cousins, will go into a room, and I'll give you one microphone. You all sit together, and I'll ask you questions about your life. You tell me a little. We'll make it just one big mass interview. And what's funny is, you'll find out, I'll show in this little clip, that people, and I know this is true in my life, we remember stories differently than our siblings, or our memories are malleable, they change. And so this is a little clip where A couple people remembered something that happened to their house when they were young differently.
I remember that house too. I remember one time a car slid down the alley and crashed into that room where Irene and I were sleeping, and Irene just kept sleeping through the whole thing. She didn't even notice that
It hit the oil tank.
yeah, that banged it. Anyway, and that was kind of traumatic to me. I remember that. And the fact that Irene could just sleep through it. And I thought, oh man, I wish I was Irene. but, and I also remember Mom making pie dough and giving us little things of pie dough to play with. And we would throw those against the kitchen door to see who could get it the flattest to stick on that.
Irene, you remember when you were talking to Tony about some of his memories that happened to you?
Right.
Well, Gene, that memory that you had of the car running into Irene's bed happened to me.
That's why Irene slept through it.
Yeah.
Oh, we did it.
Well, I remember the incident, but I thought it was my bed that got knocked back from the wall, and I never woke up from it.
So those are funny and those are real life. And I love about that, by the way, when you get the group of siblings together, you know every family, whether they're close or not close, has a certain chemistry together. And seeing some of my cousins in a room together, sharing stories and going back in time and seeing them laugh together, that gives you an insight into how they were maybe when they were younger. I would know that anyway, but I found that delightful. In that case, I'd put those things together in a video and I'd put them on YouTube, or I'd do it another way. I have a YouTube page with a number of family stories on it so that people anywhere they are can check those out. Or if they don't want it to be made public, I can send it to them on a cloud storage, like Dropbox is something I use. They'll say, well, this was pretty personal for my family. I don't really want to share it publicly. And I'm like, that's fine. So I'll just send it to you privately. If you're using a camera, I just say, keep the camera steady, because anything where it's shaky is going to just, people will get exhausted watching, and they'll pay more attention to the lack of steadiness than they will to the interview. And I also say, if you're interviewing, you can use a camera or a phone, but get it close enough to them, because if you're listening to a video and the audio is way far away and you can kind of hear them across the room, I lose interest because I want to be able to hear. That's how I take in the information. Most of us will. And so make sure, whether it's a phone, having it near, or a camera, having it near enough, or I use an external mic a lot of times, either that handheld like you might have seen in that clip, or I use what's called a lavalier mic that's kind of hooked up to my camera that really gets good sound. But the amazing thing is, iPhones and Android phones have come such a long way. When I started in the television business, one of the cameras we used for gathering news and doing promotions, it was a $50,000 deal. It did beautiful pictures, but now an iPhone can do just as well in its own way. And I'm just astounded by it. And the sound they can record, and you can use your phone. You just have to be close enough to hear them, or you can use the voice memo on either an Android or an iPhone. And what's beautiful about that is there in those apps, you can also have an instant transcription. So you can tell it to both record and turn it into text. And that saves everything. And you're like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. I've suddenly got everything written down and recorded, and I can use it different ways if I want to. But I just want to remind them that having I should say, close enough to everybody so they can hear good sound. If you wanted to, and it was just audio, go into voice memo and hand the person the phone, and they can just act like they're talking on the phone, and it sounds beautiful, as opposed to sometimes on these Zoom meetings and other things like that. When you record on your own phone and you play it back, it sounds crisp, and it's so easy to read. So I'll put some links down if you want to get into those kind of things. And I want to say, after you've collected those things, you can make a book out of it. You can make a photo document, a scrapbook, a video, or you can get somebody to do it for you. And a lot of people don't have the resources themselves, but there's a lot of good video software out there and audio software that makes it pretty simple compared to the old days to put together your own video. So, for instance, let's say you do a video interview with somebody, but there's parts you want to cut out. In these video editing softwares that are very intuitive these days, you can cut out the part where somebody was like sneezing or wiping their nose or you weren't talking, and you butt those together and you can put music underneath and you can put a picture up here. They make it very intuitive. And I would suggest trying something like that with a free software to see how do I like it. It takes a bit of a learning curve, but it's so much easier, like any of our tech is these days, so much easier and more intuitive than it used to be. So, and you can also, as probably many of you do, is create a website. I created a Burstein blog. And other my cousins have a online presence, or on Facebook. We have our own family group. So whatever you do, don't rush. Enjoy what you're doing. I have to do that with everything because I still have my regular job, but I love collecting stories. And so when I can, I do those kind of things. If you want, while you're interviewing somebody, take a picture, let them, you can send a follow-up thank you if it's somebody you want to do that to. And there's something else like we're doing here. Zoom is a powerful tool, and there's others like it, where you can record. If I was originating today's podcast and I was calling a friend, I could record it on my computer. I could say, Zoom, record this call. And as we're talking, Zoom records it. And I don't pay for Zoom, so I can get up to 40 minutes of free interview. And I've used that to interview some old classmates from Marion High School. I didn't go to the reunion, but I said, hey guys, I'll interview a few of our classmates and post those on the Facebook site so that we start to catch up on whatever each other is doing. So, for instance, here's a little clip. When you moved to Marion, were your parents of a faith background at all, or were you just like, no, we can just do whatever you want on Sunday? In other words, were you raised in it's not just about a faith or whatever, but it's also about, were they disciplinarians? Were they a loving family? What kind of family did you grow up in?
So definitely faith-based and definitely disciplinarian, because my father, Air Force sergeant.
Yeah.
So we were you really ran a tight ship, so to say. Also, you may not have known this, he was an assistant pastor at Greater Second Baptist Church, which is the church right across the street from Marion High School.
Okay.
So yes, every single Sunday morning, we marched to Sunday school first, and then we had to stick around for church.
Those stories that I posted, by the way, on Marion's site, and there's just 5 or 6 of them, people are just eating those up because Eric, for instance, the guy in that, left Marion, joined the military, ended up working in one of those nuclear bunkers where he was one of the people in charge of, if he got the call, he'd press the doomsday button. And he went on to do other things. He's just a lovely guy, and people just ate that up. So we know stories can reconnect us. We're like, I can't believe your life turned out that way. And all our lives are an evolving story, like a book. We're writing a new chapter every day. So that's, again, what you guys are doing here. And I just want to encourage you on that. So as I close, I just want to say, I have a small group that I get together with once a week, and we've been doing it for about 5 years. The church where I direct Sunday services for the people that can't make it to church, and we broadcast it on the internet. They said, hey, Joe, you want to do a small group? And I'm not a theologian or anything else like that, but I said, you know what I'd like to do is create a group where a bunch of us get together. We don't have to know each other, but we just share stories. Tell us about yourself. Tell us about growing up. How did this affect you? The same things I'm doing in an interview, because people are desperate today, even though we're more connected than ever before with our phones, with the television, with our computers. We are lonelier statistically, and they do study after study. People are lonelier and more separated than ever before. So when you can sit down with somebody and honor them by listening to them, asking them questions, and them asking you questions, you're honoring each other and saying, matters a human being. And I don't want to get all philosophical, but that is incredibly powerful in today's culture where we're just hurling stones online on social media. We're just yelling at each other and there's no good dialogue going on. So that's another thing that the telling stories can do. So in my time left, if you have any questions, I would just say ask any question you want to, and then check out the handout. And I've included my email in there if you have a specific question. I don't have all the answers, but just know that in your hands, you are doing something that's incredibly powerful. And I congratulate each and every one of you for doing that, because it takes a special person to do that. So, Kate, when you're ready, we'll go back to you.
Sounds good. Well, thank you so much for your presentation, and we do have a couple questions for you. So the first one is, what video editing software do you prefer?
Well, I use something called Adobe Premiere. It's been around forever, and but it's expensive, and so I'm not suggesting that for people. On the list of things you'll see on a web link, I put out a whole bunch of cheaper and free softwares that are still very, very good, that have a shorter learning curve. So look at the reference if you can get that on the resource material, and look those things up, because getting to the basic video editing in the old days was not for the faint of heart. It was like anything. You had to learn a lot of things.
Thank you. Our next question is, when you're planning to do an oral history interview or have a conversation with somebody, how do you decide whether you're going to do maybe audio only or video and audio?
Well, that's a good question. It depends. If I'm doing it for my family, I like to do video and audio. But for instance, when I worked at the church, I had a story collecting group of people, and I said, "Anybody, let's capture stories at church of people that we may not know." So everybody was loaded with their own phone, or we had recorders. And in that case, I said, "Don't make it complicated. Just go and say, hey." We had a list of people that were willing to be interviewed, and we said, just sit down with them with a phone, just to make it very low key, because when you have a camera pointed at you, you start to feel like sometimes you're under interrogation, and that's never the purpose. So sit down with a phone if you want, or you can use the phone to record video as well, and just talk with them. And then we'll collect those. We'll have a transcription, and we'll collect those, and we'll share them with other people. That was really pretty cool, because again, I just said whatever you can do. Make it so, capture something. And so start out small. It's like anything with exercise, with anything, what you can do right away and not creating big pains for yourself, just do that. And if you want to grow from there, you can grow from there. It's a collective process.
Thank you. Our next question is, do you have recommendations for particular cameras that people might be if they're interested in purchasing something?
Yeah. So for instance, here's my iPhone, and I was fishing with my wife and family in Florida recently, and we went on one of these charter boats where we're fishing for fish, and if we catch it and it's big enough, we can take it into shore. And here I was getting some of these great shots because birds would fly right along the boat. And then I'd get these amazing shots. And I'm like, oh my gosh, these are the best bird shots I've ever got video. And then I'd get people, when they caught a fish, I'd record it. And then I put it back in my pocket. And as I was reeling a fish, the phone scooted up in my pocket and fell overboard. So I lost my phone in 200 feet of water. But this phone I got replacement has the 3 cameras on it, so you can go wide, close, or normal. A video camera is going to have a zoom in, zoom out button. If you get the right one, you'll pay a little more, but they're not that expensive. I always go with there's many brands. I can't recommend a brand. I go with Sony or Panasonic or something like that because I'm used to it. And it'll be digital, so you can pop out a little card from it. Like when I record video, it records on a little SD card like this. And you pop it out of the camera, put it into a reader for your computer, and you just shuffle the files over. And it makes it so easy as you can imagine. So I don't have a particular camera, but again, I maybe one of my links will show you. There's so many sites out there that'll give you, here's 10 basic cameras or here's 10 medium advanced cameras, and you can find all this information just with basic queries on the internet. So I'm not going to recommend a particular camera.
Thank you. And it looks like we have one more question. So, I know you touched on this with Dropbox and YouTube and things like that, but what formats do you recommend for long-term preservation of video interviews?
That's a very good question. For any of us, if you've worked with computers through the years, you know that a hard drive tends to poop out. And so you always want to back it up. So if you saw where I was sitting beyond the mess behind me, if there is one, in front of me is a big mess of multiple hard drives. And what these hard drives are, I mean, terabyte after terabyte. And I'm a bit of a pack rat with this stuff. So not only do I record, but I duplicate on another hard drive. I've got so many terabytes of footage from years and years that to put it up all on a cloud is daunting. But what I do is take most of my stories, my completed projects, and I put them up on, for instance, I use Dropbox, but there's many services that you may pay for, but you put them up there, and I put them either to share them or to have another copy because. And by the way, I would say this about YouTube. I can't imagine. We've all heard about data farms in Fort Wayne, Indiana's getting some data farms from Google and other places like that. Because YouTube, imagine, think about it, since the 2000s, they've been collecting videos, and they haven't gotten rid of one that I know of, unless it was censored. So, and they have redundancy. They have them backed up. They must have massive, massive farms that store these things. In your case, that tells me that if you put a video on YouTube, even though it may have a commercial in it, it's pretty secure that it's going to be there. If I don't want commercials, there's a video service called Vimeo that I use. And if I want to show somebody a video I've done of them and not have commercials, I buy a subscription to Vimeo for $100 a year and I get so much storage. And that way they can watch it and I can send it without knowing that there's not going to be a commercial for a weight loss pill or something. But anyway, there's so many cloud storage out there that look around, but I happen to like Dropbox, but there's a bunch of them. So I'm not going to, again, recommend just one.
That's helpful. Thank you. So it looks like that'll finish us up for questions today. I did stick our email in the chat, genealogy@acpl.info, if anybody has any questions or would like a copy of the chat. So thank you so much, Joe, for being with us and presenting today. And thank you to everybody for attending.
All right. Well, thank you, Kate. It was
Thanks.
good to talk to everybody. Thank you.
Have a good day. Bye-bye.